Welcome to this explainer on a truly fascinating historical cold case, the Gospel Contradictions. Today we're acting as historical detectives, digging into texts that are literally 2,000 years old. So let's lay out the facts, line them up, and see what's actually hiding beneath the surface of these incredibly famous stories.
We've got four main sources, the Gospels, and they contain some pretty extreme differences. Sometimes they describe events in a way that simply could not have happened at the exact same time. It's a real puzzle, and it forces us to start our investigation with a rather provocative question. Are the Gospels lying? Normally, when two people claim totally different things about the exact same event, we automatically assume someone's making things up. But with ancient texts, we actually have to dig a whole lot deeper.
To really investigate this, we've got to reframe our basic premise, because there is a massive difference between two key concepts here. On one hand, you have a malicious lie, a conscious, intentional manipulation meant to deceive the listener. But on the other hand, you have a historical discrepancy, and that happens for totally different reasons. It could just be differing sources of info, different perspectives, simple copy errors, or even intentional literary edits by the author. Grasping that distinction is absolutely crucial for what we're looking at today.
Okay, let's move into Part 1, Ancient History Standards.
You see, ancient writers frankly did not care about strict, rigid timelines the way we do today. For them, it was all about the thematic essence. It was about capturing the true character of a person. Think of it like, it's like the difference between telling a thrilling story to your grandmother versus testifying under oath to a judge with down-to-the-second accuracy, right? An ancient author would happily mash three separate events into one single scene just to drive home a powerful theological message. And to them, that wasn't a lie at all. It was just the highly respected literary standard of the era.
Which brings us to Part 2, 4 authors, 4 audiences.
When we map out our witness profiles, we find something super interesting. Each evangelist was writing for a completely different community. Matthew, for instance, targeted a Jewish audience, so he really needed to show that Jesus fulfilled Old Testament prophecy. Mark, he wrote for the Romans, focusing heavily on dynamic actions and suffering. Then you have Luke, addressing a broader pagan audience, putting a huge emphasis on compassion for the marginalized. And finally, John went for the deep thinkers, focusing purely on Jesus' divinity. So the target audience literally dictated exactly which theological details the author chose to highlight.
Let's see this in action in Part 3, Case Study, the Nativity.
When we put the two descriptions of Jesus' birth side by side, a glaring contradiction immediately pops out. Seriously, Matthew gives us this dramatic, high-stakes story of the Magi, King Herod's fury, and a desperate midnight flight to Egypt. But Luke gives us a tranquil scene with shepherds, followed by a totally normal trip to the temple in Jerusalem for circumcision. So the modern mind instantly hits the brakes and asks, wait, how on earth could Jesus be fleeing a bloodthirsty tyrant in Egypt and perfectly fulfilling Jewish law in Jerusalem at the exact same time?
Well, the answer is actually hidden right in the author's intent. Matthew intentionally selected his details to show his Jewish audience that Jesus was a new Moses. Think about it. Moses fled Pharaoh, Jesus flees Herod. It's a massive flashing neon sign to his readers. Luke, on the other hand, cared deeply about folks on the fringes of society, so he deliberately chose details that highlighted a savior for the poor and the overlooked, which is exactly why we get the ordinary shepherds in his account. It is a textbook example of how a specific theological goal totally shapes the historical record.
Now, could we try to historically harmonize these two accounts? Sure. It is historically possible that the events just happened at different times. The Magi could have shown up months or maybe even years after the shepherds were at the manger. But the big takeaway here? The authors weren't even trying to keep a minute-by-minute diary. They simply omitted the non-essential timelines. They freely cherry-picked and arranged only the details that effectively served their core message.
So how do we make sense of all this? That brings us to Part 4, Understanding Divine Inspiration.
A lot of skeptics out there judge these texts based on a concept called mechanical inspiration. This is basically the idea that God literally dictated every single word, exactly like a boss dictating a memo to a secretary. And yeah, if you approach the text with that specific assumption, then logically, any historical inaccuracy or discrepancy means that either God made a mistake or the text is a flat-out lie.
But actually, most academics and serious theologians completely reject that dictation theory. Instead, they argue that God utilized human authors, and that means the narrative was filtered through the distinct literary styles, the cultural backgrounds, the specific knowledge, and even the natural human limitations of the writers themselves. They captured events exactly as they best understood them in their own world. So these discrepancies, they aren't seen as evidence of fraud. Not at all. They're just a natural byproduct of the human element involved in creating these texts.
I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. When we consider everything we've unpacked today, a really provocative question emerges. Rather than automatically dismissing these texts as a pack of lies, doesn't having four entirely different, very human perspectives actually give us a much richer, much more profound historical picture than any dry official record ever could? It's like looking at a diamond from four different angles. Think about that the next time you encounter these stories. Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and we'll see you next time for our next deep dive.